Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Balance with Britt podcast. I hope you are all having an amazing week. And I am so excited because today I am chatting with Emily Dawson. She is a holistic nutritionist and functional nutrition practitioner specializing in gastrointestinal health. Through her own journey overcoming IBS, Emily has become passionate about root cause healing, and she helps clients all over the globe resolve their chronic digestive issues. Welcome to the podcast, Emily.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and chat all about gut health and digestive issues. Obviously, my favorite topics, but thank you for having me.
Absolutely. They're my favorite topics too. So I feel like this is going to be such a fun conversation. We're talking today all about heartburn and why IBS isn't a life sentence. And I don't know about you, but these are a couple of my favorite things to talk about.
Oh, me too. Definitely. I think especially with the heartburn thing, the things we're going to talk about are really going to be shocking to a lot of people, I think. So that's a really exciting thing to kind of bring up and chat a little bit more about and give information that most of us don't know. So that'll be exciting. And then IBS, of course, is a huge passion of mine. That's a main area that I work in and specialize in just with my own experience with IBS. So excited to chat about that for sure.
Absolutely. I feel like this conversation about heartburn is going to blow most of your minds because, when it comes to heartburn, a lot of the time we chatted about this before we started recording, but when it comes to heartburn, it's very rarely addressed in a root cause approach, and more so addressing that symptom of that heartburn.
Oh, absolutely. And, oftentimes when these symptoms are addressed, it's using something like antacids or PPIs, and there's really no direction in terms of how long to stay on them, what the side effects are, all of that kind of thing. And what I see often in my practice is that they can actually make the situation worse over time. So very excited to dive into that. And I think anytime I talk about heartburn and share, the functional approach, the holistic approach, it really does blow people's minds. So yes, pumped about that.
That's going to be so great. Now, I always like to start these episodes by chatting a little bit about your health story, if you have one. And, I know myself as a holistic nutritionist, we often have a journey that leads us to the path of wanting to help others also struggling. And I know you said you have a history with IBS. So I would love if you're comfortable to chat a little bit about what that looked like for you.
Yeah, definitely. My journey with IBS began when I was in my late teens, early 20s. Up until that point, I didn't really have any digestive issues. I grew up, my mom was fairly health conscious growing up, everything seemed fine. And then I went off to university, started eating a lot of foods I wasn't used to. I was under a lot of stress, with studying and things like that, definitely not sleeping as much as I was prior. And I started to develop really, really bad bloating and constipation. And, at first I didn't think anything of it. I don't even think I recognized that it was something I needed to see the doctor about. It just sort of was this thing that I was living with. And then over time, it did start to get worse and worse. And at one point, I remember actually spending time with my boyfriend at the time, and I got so bloated and had such a bad stomach ache and stomach pain that I thought my appendix had burst. And we ended up calling an ambulance. I went to the hospital and they were like, "You are just so severely constipated that it's causing all this abdominal pain." And that was like, oh my gosh, what is going on here? Like, it was just mind blowing. So that's when I really started to go down the route of starting to see my family doctor, trying to get more answers. And they diagnosed me with IBS. At that time, the doctor kind of said to me, "Okay, you have IBS, you have severe constipation." I was going to the washroom probably once or twice a week. My stomach was like a balloon constantly. And he told me to take Metamucil, which I think if you have IBS, Metamucil is often kind of the first thing that is recommended to you, and to start taking laxatives. So I didn't know anything about natural medicine at the time. So I did what he said. I started taking the laxatives and I started taking the Metamucil. First of all, the Metamucil made things way worse. I was taking all this fiber and my bloating was just out of control. It was horrible. And the laxatives, they helped me, but like you said, it wasn't a root cause thing. It was just masking the symptoms. And I started to become really dependent on them. So, this went on for probably about a year or two. And I was just like talking to my mom, and I'm like, things just really don't feel right. And this is when I started to do my own research. So I was, online reading all kinds of blogs. I started to explore going into different health food stores, seeing different practitioners, and I just started learning a little bit more about the natural side of things. And it was actually in a natural health food store that I started speaking to someone who worked there who happened to be a holistic nutritionist. And she had recommended all these different supplements and foods to try and changes to the diet. And I started implementing them. And I couldn't believe the changes I was seeing. It was like so much more improvement than what I had seen from what the doctor gave me. So that's kind of what sparked my interest in the natural side of things. And then, I decided to go back to school for holistic nutrition, not so much to do that as a career at the time, more so for my own personal benefit, because I wanted to figure out, what's going on with my body? How can I optimize my health? And that's where I learned all about how IBS is not a life sentence. There's always a reason that you have IBS. And I was able to use that knowledge and really help with my own symptoms. And I was able to fully heal, which is amazing. So yeah, that's a little bit about my journey.
Oh my gosh. Okay. If people can see me the whole time you're chatting, I'm like shaking my head just with the Metamucil and like, this is something that I chat with so many clients. They're like, yeah, I was told I have IBS. I was told just to take more fiber or to take this like very generic probiotic. And it is so frustrating because I imagine yourself at that time in your life, you really, your doctor is who you're trusting. This is, you hadn't done, you're trusting them and you're like, okay, I'll take them out of Metamucil. It'll make me feel better. But as holistic nutritionists, we know how important it is to get to the root of a symptom rather than, addressing the symptom itself, which is your constipation.
Oh, totally. And I honestly had no idea that there were alternatives. When he gave me the Metamucil, he didn't actually even recommend a probiotic. It was just Metamucil and laxatives. And in my mind, I was thinking, I guess I just have to live off of these for the rest of my life. Like there was no alternative. And that's a terrible feeling. I was only 20 years old. So to think, oh my gosh, like I'm going to be taking laxatives for the rest of my life. And if I don't take them for one day, I'm in excruciating pain. I'm so bloated, so constipated. That's a terrible feeling. And it is, a bit of a hopeless feeling too, where you just realize, okay, I guess this is what I'm dealing with now. It was very unfortunate. So I was really lucky that I did happen to explore the natural side of things, and that I was able to go back to school for nutrition and kind of take another approach. But I think, you just said it, so many clients we see are in the exact same position that I was, where, they go to the doctor, they're slapped on a label of IBS, take Metamucil, take laxatives, whatever it is, and then they're just feel lost and hopeless. And it's a terrible feeling. So that's really what sparked my journey into natural nutrition, but specifically gut health for sure.
Yeah, it makes you like so much able to like resonate with your clients and really empathize with what they're going through. And you've been through it yourself, which is amazing because yeah, you understand.
Yeah. And, I think I actually remember asking my doctor, okay, so what do I do about this? And it was like, well, there's no cure for IBS. You just have to manage your symptoms. So now that I know, and I've seen the power of nutrition and functional medicine and helping people overcome IBS, it is like my mission in life to spread that awareness and let people know that IBS is not a life sentence. You do not have to manage your symptoms forever by being on a crazy diet or taking medications and supplements for the rest of your life. Like there are ways that we can figure out the root cause and overcome it so that you can get your quality of life back. Because that feeling when someone says to you, oh, there's no cure, you just have to manage the symptoms, that's a terrible feeling. You have a pit in your stomach. It's like, oh, okay, I guess I just have to live like this forever, So especially, I think it's really important to spread that and let people know there are ways to overcome it.
Yeah, especially at that age of 20, it's like, I'm going to be on laxatives forever. And one thing you said too, that really resonated with me, and I think, for those of you listening, this might sound familiar too, but when you're dealing with that intense bloating and that abdominal discomfort, you're not seeing your doctor like, this is just normal for me. Like, yeah, I'm just bloated every day, or yeah, I only poop once a week. It's just me. But that's not it's common. Yes, it's not
but not normal.
normal.
Yeah, totally. And I don't even think that I realized at the time that pooping once a week was bad. When this all first started, I just thought that was what my body was doing. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, a lot of people I think are in that same boat
Yeah.
where, even if you talk to a doctor, the definition for constipation is going to the washroom less than 3 times per week.
Yeah.
So according to Western medicine, it's totally normal and okay to only poop 3 days a week.
Yeah. Which is not the case.
Not okay. That is not okay. Your poop is where you are getting rid of all kinds of toxins, excess hormones, all kinds of stuff. If that's sitting inside you and it's not evacuating, you can imagine what's going to be going on inside your body, right? You're not going to feel very good.
Yes.
So,
and I think like poop is one of those things that like, I mean, you and I are very comfortable talking about, but it's not like you talk about it with people, right? Like, oh, how often are you pooping? Oh, it's only once a week. That's super weird.
yeah, yeah, totally.
It's sometimes you don't realize it's weird because you don't really talk to other people about it. But yeah, like ideally we want to be pooping 1 to 3 times a day, and they should be well formed and they're not loose or feeling uncomfortable, or like rabbit pellet poops are like kind of in the middle there. And yeah, I think part of it is that it's a bit of a taboo topic.
It totally is. And I think for that reason, IBS is also a very isolating thing where I do remember when I was dealing with IBS, I didn't talk to my friends about it. We weren't going out for dinner and I was saying, hey guys, I'm super constipated today and I feel so bloated and I have to undo my pants after we have this meal and go home because I feel terrible. You're not going to say that openly, I mean, now I probably would because I talk about poop all day, every day. But back then, it is a bit of a taboo topic and people don't talk about it that much. So IBS can feel very lonely for sure. And, you also might miss out on events or things that you want to do because of the IBS. Like that happened to me quite often where I'd be so bloated. I wouldn't want to go to the beach. I wouldn't want to go on vacations, things like that, because I didn't know how my bowels were going to react. So it can definitely be an isolating thing. And so I'm glad that we're able to openly talk about it and get the information out there.
Yeah. And the thing with IBS that's really tricky too, and I think we're going to get into this when we talk more about like the root causes and what you did to really support yourself. But we get this stress and this fear around food or social events, and that creates kind of this like self-perpetuating or we create that reality because stress impacts our bowels. And so we're kind of, the fear that we experience around food and around those social situations almost like guarantees that you're going to have issues. Unfortunately, not guarantees, but it makes it more likely because of just due to the impact that stress has.
Oh, absolutely. Like the gut brain connection is huge. And I think that's a big piece of IBS that's often ignored as well. One of the first things people think of when I have IBS, okay, which foods are irritating me? And then you start cutting out all the foods, but you're ignoring the deeper issue. Like what's going on with your lifestyle? Are you feeling stressed and anxious about your symptoms? And is that making it worse? There's so many different layers that you have to dig into, but definitely I agree with you 100% is, the anxiety and the fear of having a reaction or having a symptom sometimes makes that symptom come up.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like maybe I should step back for one moment too. And for those of you who are listening, like I think IBS is becoming something that is more readily talked about, but for those of you who might not be familiar, what does an IBS diagnosis mean? What does IBS mean? Is it, what does it mean when your doctor tells you like you have IBS?
So IBS, it's an interesting thing. Most of the time, IBS is kind of a diagnosis of exclusion where, you have abdominal discomfort, you're having issues with your bowels, maybe you're going more frequently or less frequently than you feel you should be. There's been a change in the appearance of your stool, things like that. And they can't figure out why it's happening, right? And when they can't figure out why, oftentimes the diagnosis of IBS is given, where it is that diagnosis of exclusion. They've looked for other things, they can't figure it out, and they're saying, okay, you have IBS. There are certain criteria that, you do need to meet in order to get a true IBS diagnosis. So you have to have your symptoms for at least 3 months with the onset at least 6 months previously. And you basically have to have recurrent abdominal pain or discomfort that's associated with two of these three. So improvement in your symptoms when you have a bowel movement, the onset has to be associated with a change in the frequency of your stool or a change in the appearance of your stool, like I mentioned. So if you have the abdominal discomfort and you're hitting two of those three markers, they'll diagnose you with IBS. As holistic practitioners, we know that change in frequency of your stool, change in the color of your stool, the texture, those can be associated with so many different things. And those symptoms are very vague. When someone works with me, we're looking at, what are your probiotic levels like? Do you have parasites, yeast, bacterial overgrowth? Do you have enough stomach acid? All of those things. But that's something that, a holistic practitioner will be digging into because they're looking at the root cause. Whereas in the Western medicine side of things, you just hit those markers. Okay, you have IBS. Here's the fiber, Metamucil, Restore, Relax, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really informative. It's great because sometimes IBS is just, it seems like a bit of an umbrella term. Yeah, because
Totally.
they don't really know what's happening, but your bowels are irritated. And it's interesting to hear that criteria that they're using for that diagnosis.
Yeah. And, there's different types of IBS. There's IBS-D, IBS-C, diarrhea dominant, constipation dominant. There's mixed IBS where you're having a combination of both, a fluctuation. And usually what they recommend is the same. So that's why sometimes the fiber might work for some people, it might not work for others, that kind of thing. But
that's a really great topic, or a great conversation to have too, because someone might be listening and be like, oh, I can't have IBS, I'm constipated. And I think often we think of IBS as this sense of urgency and diarrhea, but you can be constipated and be dealing with IBS.
Totally. And, that's what I was dealing with. I never had diarrhea. It was only constipation. Right. But I think because constipation is one of those things that we often don't recognize, where we say, we don't realize that it's abnormal, to not go to the washroom every day. You don't think about it as soon as you would the IBS-D. Like, obviously, if you notice, oh my gosh, I'm having diarrhea every day, you're probably going to see the doctor a lot sooner than if you're a little constipated. But yeah, IBS-C is just as common and it can be just as uncomfortable as IBS-D.
Yeah. And to get the same generic advice for two polarizing symptoms of the same diagnosis, that can be super frustrating. I myself have worked with clients who, they're like, I took the fiber and it really made me feel worse. I feel so helpless. And it can be so discouraging when you're dealing with these issues.
Yeah, definitely.
And so when what did you do post diagnosis to help get to the root of your IBS? Because we've been talking about how important it is to get to the root of things. And, what did you do after your diagnosis?
So mine was a little bit more of a complicated story because back then, I didn't know about functional testing, like GI map testing, SIBO testing, things like that. So I didn't do any of those tests on myself. I was more so experimenting with different things, which I know a lot of people do with IBS as you start researching online, what supplements can I take, what diet can I go on, things like that. Luckily for me, I was also in nutrition school. So I had a lot of knowledge in terms of what was going on with my digestive system. And the biggest thing that was impacting me and my symptoms was my lifestyle. So I was living a very high stress lifestyle. I wasn't, eating properly to fuel myself, to support my digestive system. And I wasn't managing stress. I wasn't sleeping properly. And once I started to implement those things, that's when I saw a huge change. I also did realize that I was dealing with a little bit of a candida overgrowth. I had low stomach acid. My digestion was a lot more sluggish than I would like it to be. And all of that we know can be tied back to stress as well. So rebalancing all of those factors made a huge difference for me. And, just like I said, managing the lifestyle, working on the stress piece, changing the way that I was living my day-to-day life, implementing some small habits. That's what really helped me the most. Obviously, I did also use supplements because I was learning about them. I was visiting different health food stores. I was in school at the time, so I was able to do it that way. But it took a lot longer because I wasn't able to do any testing to figure out what was going on right off the bat. And I wasn't working with anyone. I was just kind of using the knowledge I was gaining from school and implementing that into my life.
It's very cool though to see like for that diagnosis and for you to be told, here's a laxative and here's some fiber. And in reality, and this is something, of course, that, we know as holistic nutritionists, but it's the stress, it's the sleep, it's the lifestyle, it's sometimes how you're eating your meals. Like, are you eating in a rush? Are you chewing?
And
And
nobody asked me about any of that.
no,
Nobody even asked a single thing about what's your diet like? What's your lifestyle like? That was not even a topic of conversation. It was just like, oh, you're constipated, here you go. And
yeah.
that's crazy to think about too.
Did your doctor ask about like your diet already? Like, did they know how much fiber you were getting before they recommended a fiber supplement or?
No, it was just like, you can buy Metamucil at the store. Here you go. Write it on a piece of paper, go grab it. And, with fiber, something I teach my clients is that fiber feeds healthy bacteria in your gut. So this is a good thing. We do want to feed those bacteria because they help with digestion. They help regulate bowel movements, things like that. But your bacteria are also like a muscle. And if they have not been worked in a while, it's very challenging for them to suddenly digest all of this fiber, right? So if you think about it, if someone told you, I haven't been to the gym in 5 years, you're not going to go and tell them to bench press 250 pounds because they'd feel terrible. Same thing happens with your gut bacteria. So with Metamucil, it was just like, oh, take this amount per day. There was no gradual workup to that amount. So I just went basically from 0 to 100. I wasn't really eating any supplemental fiber at all at the time. And suddenly I'm just taking like 2 tablespoons of Metamucil every morning and my stomach is blowing up. I feel so much worse. And I think maybe it would have been different if I had slowly titrated up, but there was no discussion of that either, right? It was just like, oh, here, take the standard dosage, and then you feel even worse. So that's a misunderstood thing as well, is, titrating is important.
Yeah, because when it comes to fiber, too much too quick can certainly make us feel worse. I know that's something that I always chat with my clients about as well. And I think too, maybe we could touch on when it comes to quote unquote, just eat more fiber, even aside from supplements. We also want to pay attention to maybe the different types of fiber, soluble versus insoluble fiber. And what is your advice on different types of fiber?
So, I think that my best advice for anyone is, before you're using supplemental fiber, look at fruits and veggies. Like, that's where you want to look at first, right? Are you eating a variety of different plant foods? Because those are going to provide you with a mix of insoluble and soluble fiber, which are both very important. But when it comes to IBS and you are using something like a Metamucil supplement or a psyllium supplement, acacia gum, things like that, there are different types that are better for different people. So soluble fiber, this basically dissolves in water and creates more of like a gel-like substance. And I find that this one is very helpful for people that deal with diarrhea, because it helps to kind of just firm things up a little bit. And that can be very helpful. Insoluble fiber adds bulk to your stool and helps to kind of move things through the bowel. So that can be better for constipation. So that's kind of the main difference. When you are eating fruits and vegetables that have fiber in them, generally you're getting a blend of insoluble and soluble, which are both great. But when we're talking about supplemental stuff, yes, it totally is important to pay attention to the type based on what kind of symptoms you're dealing with, for sure.
Yeah. And the answer isn't always just eat more fiber. It's how much, it's like, how much are you starting with? What types are you predominantly getting? And if you're getting it from whole foods, then you're going to have a nice fusion of the two, which is perfect.
And often, we also have to figure out, why do you have IBS in the first place? If the root cause of IBS is something like SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, fiber is probably going to make the situation a lot worse, right? So, if we're just telling everyone who has IBS to have fiber, but there's so many different reasons you might have IBS in the first place, we don't really know, is this going to be good or bad for you? And I think that's where it's important to do testing or work with someone that can help to guide you, because with SIBO, fiber can definitely make the situation worse. So just things to be mindful of.
Absolutely. And if those of you who are listening are curious about SIBO, I have a whole episode all about it. So you can go back and check that out. But at the, end of the day, what we really want to the message we want to pass along is that IBS is not a life sentence. You won't always be fearful around that food or those social settings. And Emily, you're a great example of that.
Yes. And, cutting out more foods is not the answer. I think that was something at the very beginning of my journey. It was just like, I just stopped eating everything because everything I ate made me feel terrible. So I just kept cutting and cutting and cutting. And then, next thing you know, your window of what you can eat is so small. And that can be even more problematic because we know that variety is what fuels a healthy microbiome. So if you're cutting out all these foods, stripping them from your diet, you're going to kill off a lot of your probiotics, and then that's going to exacerbate the issue. So cutting out foods is not the answer. You really want to dig deep, figure out your root cause, correct your root cause using nutrition, natural supplements, lifestyle changes, and then you should be able to eat all of the foods you love and enjoy them and not worry about having these IBS symptoms. That's really, the message that I think we're trying to share is that It's not a life sentence. There are things we can do. You just need to figure out what your root cause is and deal with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And a few points on that is that one, sometimes you have multiple root causes, like even for yourself, you were dealing with candida and low stomach acid, and those could be rooted in stress. And so, you need to address your stress in addition to those things so that you're getting to the root cause of each of those things. And
totally. And I was also burnt out. Like I was dealing with severe adrenal dysfunction, at the time to put myself through school. I was working as a bartender late into the night. I was working till 3, 4 in the morning, waking up, going to school, studying. Like my whole circadian rhythm was off. I was totally burnt out and exhausted. So my adrenal glands were completely shot. That impacts your gut for sure. That was something I had to deal with through lifestyle primarily. There's a lot of moving parts, and it's often not just one thing. There are multiple different things that we're looking at. I also definitely had leaky gut at the time. I had a lot of symptoms that kind of indicated leaky gut. I was on birth control for years before all of this. So there's a lot of moving parts that, I had to kind of work with.
Sometimes it's just the perfect storm that's conducive to these gut imbalances. And unfortunately, I feel like our society sometimes is just super conducive to these gut health issues, whether it was birth control pill. Myself, like you, at a young age was told just to go on it. And the high stress environment, especially over the last 2 years, like with so many people working from home, you feel like you're working 24/7 because your home is now your workspace, and the stress that induces, and just the high fast-paced lifestyle that we live in, and how rare it is to sit down at a table and really chew your food and think about and have a mindful mealtime, and the digestive issues that come out of that. So unfortunately, you really do have to be proactive and mindful in our society that we live in, because it's kind of counterintuitive to a healthy gut, unfortunately, it seems.
It totally is. And especially now with, all of our devices, we're always on. That's another big thing as well. It used to be that you would go to work, plug into your computer, and you'd be on your email from kind of 9 to 5, and then you'd leave the office and it was done. But now we carry our devices around with us everywhere. So people expect immediate responses. And I feel that pull too, right? Get an email, even if it's 8 o'clock at night, it pops up on your phone. You want to respond to it because you're seeing it. So setting those boundaries is really challenging in our society. Is not really built right now for those boundaries. We're just always connected, always available. So that's a big thing too, for sure.
Yeah. And revisiting your comment on food intolerances, I think that was a really important one to talk about too, because it's so easy to be like, okay, you're intolerant to this, just eliminate it. Oh, wait, now there's another one I'm intolerant to. Let's eliminate that. And then you have this long list, but in reality, that those food intolerances are just another symptom. So why are you experiencing these food intolerances? Get to that root rather than continuing to
cut them all out.
So it's just another example of a root cause approach. Like, do you not have enough stomach acid? Is your microbiome imbalanced? It's asking these questions and working with someone who can navigate this for you, because I imagine this might sound very overwhelming to someone that's listening, being like, oh, I have this and this might be rooted in that, and what about this? And work with someone that can help you, because you and I went to school so that we could support ourselves during our own health journeys. And now, we're so passionate about helping others because we've been through it. And, we can help eliminate the confusion for those who are trying to navigate this world.
Totally. Like, I remember thinking I could just never eat dairy again. It was like, oh, I'm lactose intolerant. I can never have dairy. Then it was gluten. Oh, now I can't have broccoli. Cauliflower is an aggravant. The list just kept growing and growing and growing. And it's like, well, what are you left to eat? Right. Mm-hmm. If you have a healthy gut and your digestion is working properly, which is totally achievable, you should be able to tolerate all different kinds of foods, including gluten and dairy, and you should feel okay. Right.
Yeah.
I think we also live in a world where foods are labeled as good and bad. And oftentimes it's labeled as good to just cut gluten and dairy out of your life forever, to cut out sugar, to cut out XYZ. It's like, really, we're not built that way. We are built so that we should be able to tolerate all different kinds of foods and we should feel okay. Mm-hmm. So if you're struggling with food sensitivities, yes, I highly encourage you to work with someone who can help you overcome those issues and then bring the foods back into your diet so you can eat freely and live your life and travel and all those fun things that we often miss out on because of those food sensitivities.
Absolutely. It's all about building that digestive bonfire so that I can handle, a wet log here and there. And if we have this small, sputtering, weak bonfire, I use this analogy a lot, but a very simple, quote unquote, wet log would be enough to snuff out your flame and send you to the bathroom. So what's important is, building that strong foundation so that you can have a little bit of all of the things, and it's more realistic than cutting out everything. And especially in the long term, we don't want to have such a narrow list of foods that we can eat.
I agree with you. And I also think one thing to touch on here, is food sensitivity testing. Because there's a lot of times where I'll see clients who will say, oh, I ran a food sensitivity test 10 years ago or 5 years ago, and I'm still eliminating those foods because they cause reactions. And, food sensitivity testing can be helpful with digestive issues, but it's not the be all end all. And when I run food sensitivity tests with clients, we're only removing those foods for a maximum of 3 months. And while those foods are out of the system, we are correcting the underlying issue. So we're restoring your digestive health. We're making sure your microbiome is balanced. We're getting rid of any overgrown bacteria, healing your gut lining, things like that. And then at the end of the 3 months, those foods are brought back in and you don't have any problems. So I think that's a common misconception too, is, you can literally go to Rexall now and run a food sensitivity test. And then all of a sudden those foods are just out of your life forever, but those foods contain fiber. They feed healthy bacteria. We don't want to be cutting them out for the rest of our lives.
Yep.
So definitely that's a huge topic for sure. I'm sure we could do a whole episode just on food sensitivities.
I think maybe we should, but just like a quick, for those listening, the difference between a food sensitivity and a food allergy.
Yeah. So a food allergy is, this would be something like anaphylaxis, right? Where you eat peanuts, you eat eggs, and your body releases a ton of inflammatory proteins from your immune system. You go into anaphylaxis and it's an immediate reaction. We know what allergies are. If you're allergic to peanuts, you're probably carrying around an EpiPen. You have a bracelet that lets people know you can't have peanuts, and you'd probably be hospitalized if you were to eat them, right? A sensitivity is a delayed reaction. So this doesn't happen right away. Usually it's because you do not have the digestive capacity to kind of break down that food, or something's going on in your gut to affect the way that the food is being tolerated. And it's more of a delayed reaction. So food sensitivities, a lot of people don't realize this, but they can actually take 3 days to appear. So it's very delayed. And oftentimes the response to eating a food that you're sensitive to, it's not that anaphylactic response that I'm talking about with the allergies. It's more so things like a skin reaction. You might even have a headache or feel brain fog. You might get joint pain, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, heartburn, those kind of symptoms. So they are very different.
What would you say to someone who, okay, and I will move on to heartburn after this because I feel like I could talk forever about IBS, but when it comes to food sensitivities versus intolerances, say, someone gets a test for celiac because they suspect that they are gluten is an issue and that test comes back negative. So they don't have that immune system response to gluten that a celiac individual would, but they still seem to be triggered by gluten. In my mind, what would be a good approach is to remove the gluten for a period of time while you work to improve digestion and gut health. And then, yeah, you might be able to have it here and there, but it might still be something that we need to limit. I'm curious what what your thoughts are on that, like non-celiac gluten sensitivity.
So, there is a lot of research that shows that even in people who do not have a gluten sensitivity or gluten intolerance per se, gluten does have a similar effect on the lining of the gut, which is that it can create an increased permeability, essentially. So we basically want our gut lining to be very intact. We want it to be very strong, and we don't want it to be permeable at all because it's supposed to keep all of the bad stuff, like the toxins, bacteria, waste products inside our gut so that they're not getting into the bloodstream and kind of causing inflammation. When the gut lining becomes permeable, this is when we see leaky gut. And it's literally where, just think of it like the lining of your gut has holes in it. And that's when those toxins and things like that can get into your system. This is often what's happening with food sensitivities, is that for some reason, your gut lining has become permeable. There could be numerous different reasons this is happening. And then foods, undigested proteins, bacteria, waste are getting through the system. This often happens with gluten because gluten does have that effect on the lining of the gut, whether you are sensitive to it or not. So, when we're doing a gut healing journey, I do feel like it's a good idea to limit gluten, especially if you feel you're reactive to it. And then, maybe you try it down the road and it works for you, and that's okay. But in general, it does kind of have that inflammatory effect. I feel like I got very sidetracked with the question. So
that was great. I asked because sometimes, even when I'm working with someone, I don't like taking away food groups like gluten and dairy, but sometimes at the beginning of our journey, we need to minimize some things so that we can heal and then reintroduce so that, we see what type of effect it has once we have eliminated it for a period of time and we've worked to do that digestive healing and that gut healing. And I think my question was if someone has done the testing, they don't have that autoimmune reaction to gluten, doesn't mean that they may not benefit from removing it for a period of time if there are signs of intestinal permeability.
Yes, definitely. And, I'm very much like you in that I don't like to tell people that things need to be eliminated 100% of the time, because I think that is unrealistic, right? We all are living our lives, we socialize, we travel, things like that. It can be very challenging to cut something out 100% of the time, but gluten is one of those things that I do recommend minimizing while we are working on the underlying issue, or at least focusing on higher quality gluten, because it can increase that intestinal permeability picture. It can lead to a lot of unwanted symptoms, and it can kind of create this hamster wheel effect where you're trying to heal the gut, but then you're eating this thing that's kind of increasing intestinal permeability, driving up inflammation, and you're not kind of getting to where you want to be. So yes, for sure. When you mention someone has an allergy to gluten, we know, with celiac disease, you eat gluten, you're really not feeling well. We know it's that immediate reaction. It is kind of like that allergy effect, but sensitivity might be delayed. And that's why I think a lot of people don't realize they're affected by gluten, because the things kind of pop up a couple days later. You don't think of it. It's also a difference between sensitivities and intolerances. Like, intolerance is where you literally don't have the enzymes to break down that particular food. Sensitivity is where you're reacting to it because something's going on with your gut. So that's a big one to pay attention to as well, for sure.
Absolutely. I feel like I could chat about this forever with you, because it's just it's so interesting and it's very nuanced, which is why there is no one size fits all approach to gut health and a gut healing journey. I would love to shift a little bit, because I want to talk about heartburn a little bit with you. I see it often. Someone with heartburn seeking guidance from their doctor, they come out of it with an acid blocker, a PPI, to reduce the heartburn, makes them feel better. I am curious, one, is heartburn always rooted in too much stomach acid? Or, is there a reason why these acid blockers might make someone feel better, but it's not necessarily contributing in the long run to, you know what I mean?
Gosh, this is a great topic. So first things first, in my experience, and we both have the same education, we've been taught the same thing, but 99.9% of heartburn cases are rooted in low stomach acid. So it's not too much stomach acid. It's the total opposite. And what happens with a PPI is if your heartburn is being caused because you already have low stomach acid, and then you take a PPI to deplete your stomach acid even further, yes, it's going to mask the symptoms, but it's going to create a cascade effect of all kinds of other symptoms that are again related to that low stomach acid picture. So no, I do not think that heartburn is rooted in high stomach acid 99.9% of the time. This is very rare. I think in all of my years of experience, I've seen like one person that has too much stomach acid. So it's very, very rare that would be the case. What happens with heartburn, there's a couple different mechanisms that can take place, but basically when we eat our food, the first thing that happens is we chew it up, we swallow it, and our stomach starts to produce hydrochloric acid. It is the role of the stomach acid to get our food to a certain pH and digest it to a certain extent before it can be released from your stomach into your small intestine for further digestion. If you don't have enough stomach acid, what happens is your stomach has to work 10 times as hard to get that food broken down to that certain extent so that it can be released. When that's happening, your stomach is churning and churning and churning very aggressively, and it's taking place, it's taking a lot longer than it should. Instead of kind of 30 minutes, 45 minutes to break down that food, get it to the pH and release it into the intestine, it might be hours that this is going on. And when your stomach is churning, you can imagine that the acid that is in there is going to start splashing back into your esophagus. That can create heartburn, right? So anytime our esophagus is very sensitive, anytime acid is in there, it's going to cause an issue. So if your stomach's just churning and churning and churning, you're going to have that splashback. Another thing that can happen too is when food sits in the stomach for longer than it should, it actually starts to ferment. And when something ferments, this produces gas, and that gas puts pressure on the esophageal sphincter, which is the sphincter that divides your stomach and your esophagus. And, it's basically pushing up on the sphincter and allowing the acid to again splash back into your esophagus. So that is usually what's happening with heartburn. It's not that there's too much acid in the first place. It's that your stomach is not producing enough acid. And for that reason, food is in your stomach for way longer than it should. It's fermenting, it's splashing back. And that's kind of where this is all happening.
So interesting. And I find that that's like a huge kind of like light bulb moment for many clients when I chat with them about this difference. And it's hard because when they start taking these medications that their doctor prescribes them, they do feel better. So they're like, oh, it must be an overactive stomach or too much acid. Whereas in reality, it's kind of masking those symptoms and in reality kind of making things worse.
Oh, it definitely makes things worse because you also have to remember too, your stomach acid is like the gatekeeper to the rest of your digestive system. So first of all, one of the main jobs of stomach acid is to neutralize incoming pathogens. Mm-hmm. So if you were to eat, let's say a piece of lettuce that had a parasite on it or something like that, your stomach acid is supposed to be acidic enough that it's going to neutralize that pathogen, kill it off before it can get into your system and cause symptoms like IBS, for example, right? We know parasites highly contribute to IBS symptoms. If you're suppressing your stomach acid with a PPI, you don't have that protection. There's nothing to neutralize that pathogen. So it's just going to basically get in there freely and just kind of wreak havoc on your system. So that's one thing to keep in mind with PPIs or acid blockers in general, like Pepcid, Tums, that kind of thing. We also need stomach acid to absorb minerals and B12. So oftentimes, if you are taking these acid blockers for a really long period of time, you develop a B12 deficiency or mineral deficiency, and that can affect all kinds of stuff, including energy levels, mood, all those kind of things. So that's very important to keep in mind as well. I actually had a client come to me who had been put on a PPI, it was like 8 years prior, and she developed all these symptoms of pins and needles in her hands, which is a symptom of a B12 deficiency. And right away, I was like, we need to get your B12 levels tested. And it turns out that, her PPI was suppressing the stomach acid so much that she wasn't absorbing any B12. She developed a deficiency. So that's one thing to keep in mind too. Stomach acid is there for a reason. So we don't always want to be pushing it down and blocking it constantly. It's also what turns on the rest of your digestive organs. So like I mentioned, the contents of your stomach need to hit a certain pH and need to be broken down to a certain extent before they can be released into your small intestine. When stuff gets into the small intestine, the pancreas produces enzymes, bile is released to help digest fats, carbs, proteins, that kind of thing. So if stomach acid is not being secreted, then the rest of the organs are never going to be turned on. They're never going to be kicked into gear to start doing their job. That can also be problematic, right? Think about constipation. Low bile flow is a huge contributor to constipation. So if you don't have enough stomach acid, you're not going to produce enough bile. You're going to get constipated. Like there's so many different things that stomach acid contributes to. So constantly suppressing it can be very problematic for sure.
There's so many connections between the digestive system and other body systems. And
oh my gosh, like you need stomach acid to produce thyroid hormone. So if you don't have enough, then that can be problematic as well. There's so many connections.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things where you think that you are supporting yourselves by taking this medication, and in reality, unknowingly making things worse. And I think you explained it so well on how heartburn can actually be rooted in an underactive stomach. Because I find that most people find that very mind-boggling. Like, how on earth am I getting heartburn if I don't have enough stomach acid? And it's confusing, but you explained that so well. So if someone is listening and, they're unsure if their heartburn is connected to an underactive or an overactive stomach, because it can be confusing. The symptoms overlap for both. How might they determine where they fall?
So, with heartburn, there are different levels in which the heartburn is occurring. And oftentimes it is possible that there is underlying inflammation in the stomach lining or in the esophagus. And, that is when it can be helpful to avoid supporting stomach acid until you've healed that issue. For example, like if someone has an ulcer or gastritis, we don't want to be promoting stomach acid production because that's going to cause a lot of pain and discomfort. What we want to do first is heal that issue, and then we can begin supporting stomach acid. And that's really dealing with the root cause of that in the first place. PPIs and acid blockers are kind of the medical way to allow the body to heal, if that makes sense. So, when you suppress acid, it's going to give your stomach lining a chance to heal. So that's when they can be helpful. But as a holistic practitioner, we'd be looking at other mechanisms as well. Things like slippery elm, aloe vera, DGL, all those things can help kind of speed along the healing process. And then you would support stomach acid. But to answer your question, how do you tell? There is no real way of like sitting at home and saying, let me test my levels of stomach acid, but there are different mechanisms we can use. So apple cider vinegar challenge is a great one. If you have heartburn, you can take a little bit of apple cider vinegar in water, swallow that down. And if the heartburn goes away, that tells you, hey, my stomach acid was actually low. And that was what was contributing to the heartburn, because apple cider vinegar stimulates the production of HCl or stomach acid. So that's a really good assessment. There's things like the burp test. This is where you mix a little bit of baking soda with water, you drink it on an empty stomach, and then you time how long it takes for you to burp. That's always an option. There's also the HCl challenge, where you actually take capsules of betaine HCl, which is a synthetic form of hydrochloric acid, and you challenge and see, how many capsules you can tolerate. That can tell you whether or not you have low stomach acid. But I will say, in my experience, even if someone does not tolerate apple cider vinegar, they don't tolerate HCl capsules, digestive bitters, things that stimulate stomach acid, it doesn't actually mean they have high stomach acid. It means that there's underlying inflammation that we need to heal first before we can then start supporting the stomach acid. And that would be like the irritation in the esophagus, the gastritis, things like that. And once you heal that, we then support stomach acid and it's all good.
That's a really great explanation. And I think I think that should clarify that for many people because that is a commonly confusing topic of conversation because it's almost counterintuitive to what you think should be going on in the body. Now, I know as holistic nutritionists, we know how important it is to get to the root of an issue rather than addressing the symptom itself, which we've talked about. But what would you say are different ways that heartburn could be rooted in the body if someone is experiencing heartburn? I know that underactive stomach.
Underactive stomach. And, even if someone has an underactive stomach, we then have to look at why is the stomach underactive, right? Yeah. That in itself is not the root cause because we're not going to just put you on supplemental hydrochloric acid forever. We got to figure out why are you not producing stomach acid in the first place and deal with that. In my experience, stress is the biggest contributor to an underactive stomach. When we are in that fight or flight state, digestion is put on the back burner. It is not a priority. And so that can really contribute to low stomach acid. We also have mineral deficiencies, nutrient deficiencies. Those can contribute to low stomach acid, low thyroid function. These can really kind of be the root cause of the root cause, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Other causes of heartburn, there is the possibility that you have an overactive stomach. That could be one. And then oftentimes with heartburn, you might see things like I mentioned, like that gastritis picture or the esophageal inflammation. So if acid is always splashing back into your esophagus is sensitive and it might become inflamed. It might become irritated. So if that's happening, even the tiniest little bit of acid or the tiniest little bit of regurgitation would cause burning and heartburn. So that's a big one as well that you want to look at. And then there's things like H. pylori. H. pylori is a very common stomach bacteria. 80% of people are carrying H. pylori. They're not always symptomatic. It's not always problematic, but H. pylori produces an enzyme called urease that actually suppresses stomach acid. So, if you think about it, if H. pylori is in there and it's constantly suppressing your hydrochloric acid production, making your stomach underactive, that can contribute to heartburn as well. So this is a big one I see in my practice, and dealing with the H. pylori can often resolve the heartburn.
So interesting. I feel like there's so much great information for people in this episode for things that many of us deal with between the heartburn, the IBS, the diarrhea, the constipation. And there's so many great tips and actionable steps for people in this episode. So thank you so much for chatting with me. If someone is listening and they're like, I need to get in contact with Emily, where is a good place for them to connect with you?
So you can follow along on Instagram with me. My page is Eating with Emily with 2 underscores. I share all kinds of stuff about gut health on there. So feel free to follow. And then you can also check out my website, which is emilydawsonnutrition.com. I have lots of blogs on there and information about working with me. I do work one-on-one with clients primarily in my program called Gut Rehab. It's an intensive VIP 4 to 6 month program where we really get to the root of all of your symptoms using things like functional testing, natural nutrition, things like that. So you can check out information about that, and you can send me an email as well if you are interested in working together, or you can click the link on my website to book a free call with me.
Perfect. Thank you so much for really shedding some light on some confusing topics. And I really hope that those of you who are listening, some of this information resonated with you. And if you know someone that deals with IBS or heartburn, pass along this episode to them. And again, thank you so much for chatting with me, Emily.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I think, we're due for another episode just about food sensitivities.
I think so too. I am really excited for that as well.
Yes, definitely. Well, thank you so much. This was really great. And as always, I love chatting all about gut health. So yeah, this was awesome.
Perfect.